Welcome back to the Talking Hedge. I'm Josh Kincaid, Capital Markets Analyst and host of your Cannabis Business Podcast. Today we've got Whitney Hahn, a subject matter expert with marketing. She's with Graffiti. What is Graffiti? What do you guys do?
So we are a full-service creative agency here in Fremont, and we help with branding, we do marketing, app development, content creation. I mean, you name it, we probably do it.
So we're going to take a look at successful marketing for your cannabis business. There's a lot of issues in the industry. Maryland doesn't allow for cannabis advertising on billboards, just like Washington State has some issues. They've since retracted on that. But some of the headways, some of the restrictions, the rules, the regulations provide a lot of uncertainty for the industry with marketing, branding, advertising. So it's funny to see a Christmas miracle when the Washington court overturned a marijuana sign rule that banned a string of lights selling pot. So it's pretty ridiculous that the Liquor and Cannabis Board had to go to court over Christmas lights selling pot. You really can't advertise, you can't market, you can't do anything. You see a lot of these articles about how to win over cannabis consumers through media, and yet the number one brand on this article for the hottest brands is under investigation for selling illegal products. So even with branding and marketing, there's a lot of obstacles. With packaging and design, we've seen a lot of hiccups in the industry where rules and regulations from the Liquor and Cannabis Board in Washington, there was a rule that they tried to implement last year that would have affected the industry by 70% by changing the allowable shapes and colors of edible products.
Right.
So just simple stuff like that where an industry or regulators that don't understand the industry try to implement rules that, they think that colors are going to affect or be targeting children, and yet that same liquor and cannabis regulator has pink bubblegum vodka. And so the hypocrisy is real, but yet companies are still trying to move forward and advertise. And I think that's going to be the main point, especially this year with vaping. You see a lot of companies with vaping not being able to use social media influencers. So Facebook and Amazon just banned social media influencers with vaping. So even more. You mentioned geo-targeting, which is huge. A lot of companies aren't using data at all. So they'll use, if they have money and if they have a plan, they'll probably look at just general targets or channels like TV or radio, newspapers, online. They might use social media influencers, billboards, buses. Cannabis industry, though, is incredibly constrained. They don't have access to banking. They don't have access to capital. And if they do have the wherewithal to utilize some of those marketing channels, they're definitely not using data. And being in Seattle, it's a great opportunity for strain-specific products or just flavor profiles, inventory control, all of those things, and then using texting for geo-specific areas. So I'm looking forward to 2020 beyond and seeing what the industry is going to do with that technology. But right now, I'm just not seeing it in cannabis yet.
No, not yet. I think we're going to get there, though. I mean, and with so many restrictions in the industry, like I said, it's the companies are creatively advertising by, geo-targeting their audiences. They're hiring micro-influencers. Now, that might be a little bit different for vaping because obviously they just banned that. Starting your own podcast, and that just goes back to you want to be the thought leader in your industry, and people are naturally going to come to you and buy your products. Or you could hire a creative agency and have them help you with your marketing strategy, because a lot of these cannabis and, mostly cannabis brands, they focus so much on the product that now I feel like many of them are having to backtrack and figure out how to do marketing because they got away with just, we created this amazing product and we now try to present it to a lot of budtenders, but nothing sells just by creating it. Like the whole saying, make it and they will come, or create it and they will come. I don't think that rule is completely true.
It's not. I mean, you brought up budtenders, right? So when you go into a store and there's 2,500 products and the person walking in isn't really familiar with all of those product SKUs, maybe the number one underutilized tool is the bud tender for marketing, branding, sales. And so I think if more companies were to utilize the vendor model, where they go around once a month or whenever and have vendor days to explain that to customers, to show their product, but to use that time to teach those bud tenders as that kind of key position between bankruptcy and billions. I use air quotes because you can't file bankruptcy as Schedule 1, but using those bud tenders to describe the products is probably one of the biggest opportunities right now for branding, because people just don't know how else to go in and tell from one product from another, how that product is going to work for them, how it fits their budget, their needs and their wants. And I'm not really sure if there's any other product out there that's specific to that. It's an interesting situation where you're limited on how you can advertise, and then you walk in and you aren't really familiar with the product on top of that. Right. So trying to educate and then sell, I think, is one of the most difficult things to do, and that's where the cannabis industry is.
Right. Well, and that's another thing that we've been seeing a lot with different cannabis brands in the industry, is that we're emphasizing the importance of educating their sales reps that are selling to these stores, because if they don't know what the brand is and what they're selling and what the story is behind the company, how are they going to convince the bud tender? If you can't tell the bud tender why your product is different than all these other cannabis brands that are trying to get in the store, your chances are very slim. And that's just the first hurdle. Getting your product on the shelves is step one, but now you got to sell it. Now you got to make that product move. And because there are so many restrictions in the cannabis world with advertising and marketing, you've really got to figure out, and you've got to stay on top of all of the rules and regulations and figure out the areas where you can really just full throttle it through. Creating content consistently, or, consistently producing organic social media, or geo-targeting using the digital space, And if you don't want to learn that stuff, hire somebody, because you will have a competitive advantage over all these other brands that are not investing in marketing and branding because they don't see the value. But by the time that they do see the value, it makes you wonder, is it going to be too late?
Right. I mean, traditional cues for purchasing is based on price and convenience. So these bud tenders are constantly being asked, what's the highest percentage at the cheapest price? And so some of the blunders that we're seeing is packaging being turned around because that data is on the back. Mm-hmm. So you spend $50,000 to have somebody come up with, a fancy logo, and you pay $40,000 for the packaging, and who knows how much for the production of that product. But when that bud tender then turns it around and you can no longer see all that hard work with the branding and the marketing and even the window for the product, all of a sudden you are solely left to that bud tender's recommendation for your product to be seen, which isn't really like anything else. If you go to a grocery store, some of those soda manufacturers, they have employees that put that product on the shelf so that your logo is facing the customer at all times. And we don't have that. The shoe companies at a mall will make sure that there's rapport with the management and that their products are selling. And you don't have that in the cannabis industry to the same degree, because bud tenders are the ones that are putting all the packaging on the wall, and there's not a lot of interaction for new products, new types. There's not a lot of data for why the purchasing decisions are being made. So until that happens, it's kind of anyone's guess without asking the bud tender, without looking at the data. There's a lot of these companies just going in blind, and that can be seen by these packages turned around. And that's mostly because in Washington, it's not, the stores don't own the grow, so it's not vertically integrated. Whereas in Colorado, that store might own the farm as well, and they package it and everything in between. So every state is different. The industry isn't unison yet. It's not a whole There's regulatory changes that are smacking people in the face. So business as usual is impossible, which is kind of hindering a lot of these companies and queuing them up for consolidation, in my opinion.
The way that I think about it is, why wouldn't you start brand awareness and building your brand from the start than having to go backwards?
Mm-hmm. I think it's probably a lack of capital, a lack of professionalism, a lack of a plan. Knowing that your plan is obsolete the moment it's written, you have to pivot to stay relevant because there's so much regulation. But a lot of people just aren't choosing the appropriate channels. They're looking at maybe TikTok or Snapchat, not knowing that the demographics are too young, or not understanding that LinkedIn provides huge opportunities for either distributors or wholesalers or other opportunities than the end user. And so just maybe there's just a lack of consulting of professionals or understanding of the data.
Yeah.
I mean, 6 years is a long time in Washington to be able to look at that. You only need 3 years to create a trend.
Right.
And so choosing those marketing channels, I think, is important. So whether it's newspapers or print outlets, industry-specific publications, billboards or bus advertising, whatever is legal in that area should be looked at. But I kind of feel like, at least in Washington, it's a small area. They're only looking at the state, and they're not looking at becoming a multi-state operator, and they're not looking at exit strategies. So using that first mover advantage is imperative, because those that don't aren't going to be around. They think they're going to have a legacy. They think they're going to be a retail shop, when in the end it's going to be Larry's Handy Mart in a world of 7-Elevens.
Right.
And if you don't utilize that first mover advantage, I think you're going to be left in the dust.
Right.
So utilizing marketing channels, what are you seeing successful companies use?
I would say they are using different digital magazines, some billboards, but billboards are very tricky in the sense that you don't know what the ROI is.
Right.
That is all about brand awareness. I would say organic social media is a big one, because even as companies grow to be these huge, consolidated groups, you still want to be relatable to the customer at the end of the day. The customer has to look at you and say, oh, I can see myself in those shoes. I can see myself using that product. I think that that's super important as well. What have you seen from your point of view? Companies that are being successful, what are they doing?
I think they're utilizing Facebook and Instagram for the most part, even though Facebook has 1 or 2 billion active users every day. It's kind of a black hole, mostly negative. Some of the more successful companies I'm seeing are using LinkedIn. It has a pretty good amount of business to it. So if you're business to business, I think that's a great tool, sometimes underutilized. And then some of them are using industry publications, but I don't think that there's a high return on investments. It's hard to take a look at where people are making the decisions. And then some of the text alerts are actually working pretty well. Whereas I think for most industries, that's not something that they would go after, but because of the lack of opportunities, deals, again, it's sales and convenience are the top 2 factors for purchasing decisions. Cannabis isn't any different. So if you send somebody a good deal, that's going to drive people through. So I've seen a lot of texting convert to sales at a really low expense. Yeah. So we just had New Year's Eve. So one of the low price retail shops, as Uncle likes here locally, they would send out a text alert saying, dollar joints or $5 concentrates or whatever that deal is. If you sign up, they'll send you an alert. You can get 5% or 10% off if you order online. And so that's a really easy, cheap way to convert a simple text that's geo-targeted to someone who's around that specific store to convert those into sales. And they can also use more organic social media. Maybe you can explain a little bit more about how companies can generate more organic flow.
So for organic social media, you're not trying to create, I would say, you're trying to document. and you're trying to educate your customers. So it's maybe taking the time and sitting down and telling them what the difference between this product and this product, or what this product, what kind of effects you should expect to have. Or like, what goes on in the factory? How are you producing the plant? What are the employees saying? Featuring your employees, featuring your customers. It's not like an ad where it's like, buy this product here, buy it now. So it's more of a conversation versus, I need you to buy this and this is where you buy it.
Which isn't even legal. You see a lot of companies that'll just have a model wearing a t-shirt on Instagram, and it's not creative, it's not new, it's not interesting, but it's the only way that they know how to get their advertising across, when really it could just be something about an employee talking about how they gave their dog CBD and how it worked.
Yeah.
Original content isn't anything new, it's how you get ranked in Google. And maybe that's an opportunity too, is taking pictures and uploading it to Google Maps so that your business can see those pictures. And that's another free way to kind of be seen. Again, CBD gummies were the 2018 #1 search term. So jumping on the back of that and having original content to keep up with what's trending, what's new, in an inexpensive and sometimes free way to do that.
Right.
And engaging with the audience, right? Having something that's worth engaging, I think, is better than shock value. So if there's companies that are able to put out information that's not just about likes and shares, but that's really engaging, to respond to those and not just leave the likes or leave the comments not responding to. There's a lot of companies that could be better about communicating, interacting with their user base.
Right. I think and like you had mentioned, you want to have a conversation with your end consumer. Don't make it all about you. Make it about them. How is this going to help them? How is this going to improve their life?
Yeah, it's definitely not easy. There's an analysis on marijuana ads. So we're going to jump into this little abstract real quick about the results of this study that talked about ads depicting the use of cannabis as part of an everyday life. They co-opted mainstream events such as holidays to promote sales. Ads of cannabis products emphasize the lifestyles that conveyed enjoyment of time and nature, such as scenes of people sitting by waterfalls, contemplating natural landscapes, paddleboarding, and canoeing. A sizable proportion of the cannabis ads shared with alcohol ads have an emphasis on personal and social rewards of using these products rather than the product features of quality and taste. I think Corona does the same thing. You'll never see somebody drink a bottle of Corona. It's always about the beach life. Mm-hmm. And so there's been a huge push again with the FDA against claims of, relaxation or otherwise. So I think that's going to probably fall in the back of alcohol ads with cannabis companies only focusing on that social effect of having fun and not about the product itself or the quality or the taste. And so this particular report concluded that in Washington State, cannabis use ads tend to focus on solitude and outdoor recreation rather than parties and team sports, a common theme in alcohol ads. So while the theme differs from alcohol, marijuana marketing mimics strategies used by alcohol industries, such as promoting the identification of other products with lifestyles and values considered appealing to attract new customers, which may or may not appeal to youth. But all in all, sounds like it's pretty much just normalized, professionalized, finally catching up to everything else. Even though it's incredibly constrained, it's still Schedule 1, federally illegal. There's a lot of challenges for the industry.
A lot of challenges, but we're moving forward. Slowly but surely.
So it's 2020. What's your 2020 vision for the cannabis industry with regards to being able to market or brand or advertise? Do you think it'll eventually just be like any other commodity? Do you think it's going to continue to be overly regulated? What's your take on it?
I think it's going to be overly regulated for the next, I'd say, couple years, which is sad to say. We're always away.
Hopefully the rest of the emerging states are taking notice of the Petri dish experiment we have in Washington and knowing that banning billboards doesn't really work, and limiting out-of-state investors doesn't really help the industry. Eventually, hopefully, it'll just be like any other commodity, but time will tell.
Only time will tell.
So before we wrap this up, there's been a lot of trust factors with vaping. So there's been mold to gold billboards showcasing that they'll take your moldy product and turn it into concentrates. There's been failed testing for infused and non-infused pre-rolls. So I think a lot of the branding that's going to be in 2020 and beyond is going to be focusing on your trusted brands. So how are companies going to utilize their marketing channels to not only become a household name, but become that trusted brand?
First, as a company, you need to figure out what exactly it is that you want to do. So are you trying to drive traffic? Are you trying to sell a certain product or maybe a new product? Are you trying to increase your brand awareness? And like I think we had talked about a little bit before, it's most companies are not trying to build brand awareness because they don't see the value in it yet.
There's a lot of these companies whose brand is developed simply by asking the bud tender what's the cheapest price at the highest THC percentage, and that's how the brands have been developed in Washington State. Now it's the trust factor, but eventually it's going to be about just normalizing, just like everything else. It's just going to become about that advertisement. How does that brand relate to me personally? Am I impacted, affected? Does it relate to me? Right now, the only thing that's relatable is, does it get me impaired or does it get me high, and does it fit my budget? And normally people don't buy wine to say, does it have a handle on it? Is my tequila bottle made out of a plastic bottle? We're not looking for value when it comes to alcohol. We're looking at quality, and also does that brand reflect who I am? So is that going to be more of that normalization process? Is it going to be just the same, or is cannabis different?
I mean, alcohol and cannabis are alike, but it's not apples to apples. You know what I mean?
Why is it different?
Well, because they're not the same product.
Mm-hmm.
Cannabis does things that alcohol doesn't do.
So with that, we're going to roll this one up. I'm Josh Kincaid. I want to thank my guest, Whitney Hahn. She's a subject matter expert in marketing. She's with a company called Graffiti. Thanks for being on the podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
How can people get a hold of you?
They can reach me at my email. So it's whitney@graffiti.com, and graffiti is spelled GRAPHITI.com.
And I'm Josh Kincaid. This is The Talking Hedge. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Or don't. And I'm out.